And if you have really even proportions and if everything kind of just works out, you tend to not have a very large chest or very broad shoulders, your back's pretty straight, then this is really a Goldilocks sweater for you, where the sweater starts to ride up and you get all this bunching up here. And that's because your chest is trying to find a place to go. Okay, here we are. I've got a huge stack of sweaters here. Some of these I've made myself, some of these I've purchased, but they all follow a different form or a different shape of yoke. And today, that's what we're going to be talking about. What are the different yoke shapes of sweaters and how their unique and individual shapes work with your unique and individual body? I'm excited for this video, but I will tell you that I've already recorded the first half of this video and I had to do it all over again for reasons. But I'm excited to do it the right way this time. Now, we are going to get into sweater style, and I have 6 sweater styles that I want to share with you guys today. They're the more common ones. And actually, I had a little bit of fun with this. I made little paintings of each of the different sweater styles that we're going to talk about today so that I could illustrate what they look like and their at-a-glance features. And so today we're going to be talking about the Raglan, the saddle shoulder, the dolman or batwing, the circular yoke, the set-in sleeve, and the drop shoulder. Aren't those adorable? And I'll be giving you a little bit more of a close-up snippet of each of those to introduce each section. Now, I have to tell you, it is almost summer. Technically, I guess it's summer and it's warm, but I am going to put on each one of those sweaters that corresponds to the type that we're working with here. I've got my hair fork to toss that sucker up. It's going to get hot. It's going to get lit. It's going to be good. I want to mention before we get into it too much, though, that when it comes to sweaters, knitting sweaters of various different yoke constructions and shapes, they're not always going to fit your body the way that you want them to fit. Now, I am not an exception, but I have very little in the chest department. I have a relatively narrow frame. I feel like I have somewhat broad shoulders, but everything's pretty straight. Okay, so I'll put each of these sweaters on and they all kind of just look the same. Now, I know that I am not typical of some people who tend to have really broad shoulders or really narrow shoulders, or maybe they have a really long torso or a really short torso. I don't have a lot of extremes going on. And so it's important to have ways when it comes to knitting sweaters to help modify patterns if that's something you are interested in doing. Another thing that you could do is just look for particular patterns that have characteristics that you know work for your body. I mean, you could really get into the weeds on modifying the hell out of a particular pattern to have it fit your body perfectly. But at the end of the day, that could be a lot of work maybe you're not willing to do. However, if you are willing to get into that, my one resource that I go to time and time again to answer some of these questions for me is Maggie Roggetti's Sweater Design in Plain English. This is fantastic. I mean, you don't have to use it as a step-by-step tome, if you will, but it's a great place to go if you need to have a little bit more of an understanding about shoulder slope, about how to get your armholes to the proper depth. What is your armhole depth? All of this information is in this book and it's just so easy to digest. So if you don't have this book, check it out at your library, see if it's for you, and then add it to your knitting library because it is really fantastic, especially when it comes to, like I said, taking some of these designs and tweaking them to help them fit your body. Now, for today's video, what I am going to do here is I'm going to share with you these 6 particular yoke types of sweaters. I'm going to talk about what it is that they do, how they interact with your body, and what it is about certain body shapes that might make them limiting. And then I will send you in the direction of some particular patterns or give you some pattern tips and things to look out for when it comes to choosing patterns for that particular style of sweater. I'm also going to link down below to some videos that I think you might find helpful. I have a video on how to add bust darts with Coco knits. I'm also going to add another video from the Unapologetic knitter where she talks about vertical and horizontal bust darts as well. Oh, and actually there's another one for 9 bust dart shaping hacks by Nerdy Knitting that if you're interested in adding bust darts to any of these sweater types here, you definitely need to watch this one as well. Link down below. I also have a video where I go into detail about 2 different types of neckline shaping using short rows or the staggered start method. I'm going to link to that as well because it's a great place to go if you want to know more about what is going on with short row shaping. And then there is another Unapologetic Unapologetic knitter video down there that talks about short rows. I've got links for you down in the description box. Definitely head over to Patreon to check out the Franken Sweater series. You can join Patreon to become a patron and enjoy a lot of additional content, which I greatly appreciate. However, if the Franken Sweater series is right for you, you can purchase the series as a standalone purchase without becoming a monthly member. It's completely up to you. I'll be showcasing the Franken Sweater in just a little bit. Let's go ahead and dive into it. I'm going to don the first sweater, and we are going to begin by talking about drop shoulders. Drop shoulder sweaters are relaxed and easygoing, and they include a shoulder seam that extends beyond the natural line of the shoulder. This adds some more horizontal width and some visual weight to the upper body that broad shoulders and longer torsos can balance really well. It's also great for a casual or oversized aesthetic. All right, here we go. I got my stripe hype on. We're gonna have to get the hair up and out of the way so that we can really get into this. Now, a couple of things about this sweater here. This is called the stripe hype. This is knit in what is called the contiguous method. It is seamlessly knit from the top down, but it follows the drop shoulder construction. So it's a little bit of a caveat, if you will. It's not seamed like a typical, well, what's typical anymore when it comes to patterns? I feel like most things are knit seamlessly these days. However, traditionally a drop shoulder is one of the more commonly seamed patterns. However, with this new contiguous method, it's more common to see them knit seamlessly from the top down. And so this is my drop shoulder. Now, the drop shoulder extends that shoulder seam over the natural line of the shoulder. So this is going to add width to the upper body. It's actually great for folks with broader shoulders and longer torsos because it adds a little bit of balance to that weight in the upper body. Now, some people will say that folks with broad shoulders should avoid drop shoulders. However, I tend to disagree. Because the shoulder naturally drops beyond the line of the shoulder, there's less of a chance that broader shoulders have to fight for a place to hang out. It just kind of works, and it gives a more intentional, slouchy, oversized look. That relaxed, kind of borrowed from the boyfriend look happens effortlessly with a drop shoulder sweater. Now, because there tends to be more fabric in this upper arm area because of that drop shoulder, it can pull and be bunchy if there's not a lot of place for this to go on maybe a shorter torso or somebody that has a more narrow frame. If you have a more narrow frame than what the pattern is assuming, then you're going to have a lot more fabric dropping over the shoulders. Now, that may or may not work for you, but it is something to consider. The more narrow your frame or the shorter your torso, the less space that the fabric has to go, and you might get some awkward bunching or pulling of fabric. Some things to look for in your patterns is to check for a schematic that tells you the armhole depth. If your size has anything over 9 inches of armhole depth and you tend to have a shorter torso or a more narrow frame, you really might want to consider making some accommodations because the armhole depth might kind of contribute to a more bunchy look down below. I kind of feel like a safe rule of thumb when you're really wanting to make sure that you don't have too much going on down here is 9 to 10 inches max of an armhole depth for a more oversized slouchy look. Raglan sweaters are my personal favorite, and they offer really interesting diagonal shaping lines that run from the neck to the underarms. This is great for try on as you go knitting, and straight bodies or people with really balanced proportions tend to fit into a Raglan sweater really well. Okay, now we're moving into Raglan territory. This is the Franken sweater. It has a very open, kind of almost like a boat neck look to it. This is knit and designed by yours truly. The pattern is linked down below, and the entire Franken sweater series is over on Patreon. I love a Raglan sweater. It offers such a great try on as you would go, just sizing as you go experience, and most often Raglan sweater patterns are knit seamlessly from the top down. You guys, if you see weird things happening with my hair that I obviously don't catch, you just have to kind of go with it. Raglans are traditionally shaped with those seams going from the neckline to the underarms. You notice them by those really lovely diagonals that run over here. Some people might like those, some people might not. I tend to really like the look of the diagonal seams. These ones are really wide. They kind of hit right at the front of the shoulder on me, but they run from the neckline all the way down to the underarm. And if your proportions align with the construction of the sweater, then they fit your body perfectly. However, if you've got a fuller chest or narrower shoulders, these seams can pull and pucker and cause things to ride up in really weird ways. And what I mean by that is if you are increasing both your front, your back, and your sleeves all at the same rate, you're liable to hit your limit for your underarm before you hit your limit for your bust if you tend to be more full in the bust, which means that everything fits okay in the arms, but things pull really tightly along the bust. Now, this particular sweater and a lot of Raglan sweaters that I have knit accommodate for this. That means that even though they have that diagonal shaping, the sleeve shaping ends sooner than the chest shaping ends. And so you get some more width here without having to get additional bulk around the sleeve. If you would like to learn more about how to make this modification, another really great place to look is Karen Templer's How to Improvise a Top-Down Sweater. She talks all about that here, about how you stop increasing in the sleeve before you stop increasing in the chest. So that way you still have space here when maybe you don't need the additional space here. It is just definitely something to consider because the natural shaping of a raglan assumes that your body is growing vertically and diagonally at the same rate. And it's just not. Now, most patterns have this built in, but if you do need to make an accommodation or if you are checking patterns and seeing if they're right for you, make sure that the pattern lists neck shaping or shoulder shaping, whether it's staggered start neckline or short row shaping at the back of the neck. That's going to provide you with kind of a little bit of additional length to the back to accommodate a rounded back. You can also add darts here if you need more space in the bust or some additional short rows in the body of the sweater, and that information is linked down below. Another thing that you might notice if you tend to have a fuller chest, and this happens with circular yoke sweaters as well, and we'll talk about that in a moment, is that if there is not enough chest fabric, that means fabric that you're adding that is dedicated to the chest, it has to pull from the body of the sweater. And so you're going to have this kind of thing, this phenomenon that happens where the sweater starts to ride up and you get all this bunching up here. And that's because your chest is trying to find a place to go. And so if it can't get it here, then it needs to get it from down here. And then you have that natural pull up. So you really want to make sure you have enough space in the chest to accommodate your chest so that it's not trying to pull it from other parts of the sweater. When it comes to raglan sweaters, if you do have a fuller chest, bust darts are your friend. Circular yokes increase evenly in rings from the neckline down, often decorated with color work or textural motifs. This is best for evenly proportioned torsos, shoulders, chest, and back, but if accommodations aren't made in the form of neckline shaping or any additional shoulder shaping, it does tend to ride up on folks who have fuller chests or more broad backs. Okay, circular yoke sweaters are next. I absolutely love this sweater. However, I know that a circular yoke sweater can be pretty limiting for folks that have really broad shoulders or, again, a full bust. I feel like you'll find that a lot of things that get in the way of a sweater fitting properly, and not even properly, but just fitting your body the way you want it to fit right out of the box, is the chest and the broadness of the shoulders or even the rounding of the back. A narrow frame and a shorter torso, it's kind of easy to accommodate those kinds of things by choosing maybe a smaller size and then just sizing, adding more increases or knitting something shorter. But when it comes to accommodating a chest or the roundness of the back, that's where those neck, short rows and bust darts, that's where those things come in clutch. And a circular sweater definitely is no stranger to those issues. Now, what makes this special is the fact that you build a yoke in rings around the shoulders with increases that are included at even consistent intervals. And that accommodates these really gorgeous color work motifs or lace textural motifs because they don't have to account for inconsistent increases or increases that don't happen at the same rate all the way around the sweater. So you have that growth around your shoulders with really consistent increases growing outward in rings around your shoulders. And if you have really even proportions and if everything kind of just works out, you tend to not have a very large chest or very broad shoulders, your back's pretty straight, then this is really a Goldilocks sweater for you, and you find that they fit really well. Now, just like with the Raglan sweaters, if you don't have enough space, if your increasing and yoke building didn't build in enough depth here to accommodate your chest, then you're going to have that riding up issue again, which means your chest is going to have to steal fabric from the other parts of your sweater and it's going to ride up. Now, it kind of makes me think that one of the really great ways to combat this is after you've done your last increase round of your yoke, do some short rows to give you some additional room for your chest to go, or add bust starts, but it is something to consider. If the yoke is not deep enough to accommodate a more voluptuous bust, then you are going to have some issues with it riding up. Some things that you want to look out for. You want to make sure that the pattern includes short row shaping. It should mention that on the pattern page on Ravelry if it is a nice detailed pattern page. But if you've already purchased the pattern, you can skim through the pattern and make sure that there's some shoulder shaping happening on the back of the neck, and a bonus if it's also happening below the yoke at the last couple of rows after the increasing happens. Also, you want to make sure that whatever motif is being used, whether it's color work or texture, that it's not happening too high up on the yoke and then the rest of the yoke is plain, because those motifs are naturally going to pull in, unless of course it's a very open lace motif that tends to do the opposite. If it's color work, it's going to cinch in. And if it's only happening in the upper bust, you're going to feel that pulling in on your bust. Make sure it's a little bit lower. You can also make some adjustments yourself by adding some plain rows prior to the motif, but it can be really hard to figure out all of the math and the numbers to line up with your color work motif if you do that. So, you have to tread lightly there, but you want to make sure that it doesn't happen too early on in the yoke and that it has some space to push it down a little bit if you tend to be more, generously busted. I absolutely love this sweater. This is the Magnolia Bloom sweater by Camilla Vaude. The lace motif that's happening here is nice and deep, and so it accommodates for, if it had to stretch around, I don't like to use that word stretch, but if it did have to drape around a larger bust, it's a nice wide motif and it's lace, so it's naturally more open. Of course, if it has to pull around a bust, you need to wear something under it, but I feel like you would have to wear something under it no matter what, because there's just lots of strategically placed holes. Something to consider, but I really love this for a circular yoke sweater. Set-in sleeves are the tailoring favorite. Shaped sleeves are sewn into defined armhole notches, and this is what you see in most ready-to-wear clothing. It's just a very tailored look. It has a lot of structure, and for that reason can be somewhat unforgiving, but it does provide really clean shoulder lines. I find this is great for a more masculine fitting sweater. Okay, we're on to the next sweater here, and that is the set-in sleeve sweater. Now this sweater, I didn't knit this. This is something I bought at the store. It is a set-in sleeve sweater. That is the style here, but it fits me a little bit more like a drop sleeve, and you can see because it extends over the natural line of my shoulder. But for all intents and purposes, it's an oversized set-in sleeve sweater. It's the closest I could come. Now, the reason I couldn't find one is because I really don't tend to like them on my body. Again, I have a very shallow shoulder slope, which makes me feel like I have broad shoulders, and I feel like set-in sleeves tend to give me a little bit more of a shoulder pad, structured 1980s vibe that I'm just not into. And that's me, okay? Because there's a lot of folks out there where set-in sleeve is where it's at, and that's great. But for me, it's just not. This is as close as I could come. Okay, let's dive into what makes a set-in sleeve. With a set-in sleeve, you get a nice clean shoulder because the sleeve meets the bodice at the shoulder's natural edge. It's altogether just a lot more put together and tailored. Most of the time, set-in sleeves are seamed garments, at least in the sleeve department, where the sleeves are knit after the fact and then seamed into the sweater, which provides with a lot of great structure. But because it has a lot of that great structure, if you're knitting the sweater in pieces, it's really particular about size. You kind of have to get things right so that they line up and fit together. But in terms of wearing, that additional structure can mean that the sweater is rather unforgiving if it doesn't fit your particular shoulder slope and shape and all of that. With my sweater here, it hangs off my shoulder a little bit. Maybe this is designed or sized for somebody that has a broader shoulder or, a more shoulder out here. Otherwise, it could ride up and be out this way if maybe the shoulder slope is there to accommodate somebody who has more shallow shoulders or maybe a deeper shoulder slope. One way or another, if your shoulders don't fit into a set-in sleeve sweater nicely, it's either going to ride up towards your neck or dip down like a drop sleeve, kind of like an unintentional drop sleeve, which could take away from the overall shape of the sweater. So it is a little bit more tailored, it is a little bit more structured, but sometimes all of that can be a little bit more restrictive. One way to accommodate for a shoulder slope that is either more shallow or more deep than what the sweater really is meant to accommodate is to use shoulder shaping short rows. There's a great blog post that talks about how to shape with short rows at the shoulder, and I will link to it down below because it's a great place to go if you really do need to add some extra short rows here to accommodate for a different shoulder slope than what's intended in the pattern. But when you're shopping patterns and you're looking for a set-in sleeve design and you want to figure out if it's going to work for your particular shoulder, look for the schematic if you've already purchased the pattern or something that tells you what the shoulder slope of the pattern is. That's not an easy thing to find if you don't have the physical pattern with you, but some really good patterns that have all of that kind of tied up nicely with a bow are Jared Flood patterns or anything by Brooklyn Tweed. Their patterns are really in depth with lots of schematics, and they do give some information about that shoulder slope and the measurements of the shoulder that you can compare to your own shoulder to see if it would work for you. What you need to know and what you want to take away from that is the set-in sleeve is going to give you a tailored, structured look that looks more formal, more put together. It's not slouchy, it's not relaxed. It's not really typically a casual style. If the set-in sleeve is the more masculine favorite for the sweater constructions, the dolman sleeve is the feminine counterpart. Dolman sleeves extend from the body of the sweater in one continuous piece, creating a bat wing-like shape with a deep armscye or armhole and minimal sleeve shaping. You'll often see these work sideways or from the bottom up in a single panel. It's perfect for lightweight yarns that have a lot of drape. It doesn't have any shoulder seams, so it's not going to restrict your movement, and it is pretty flattering on most bust sizes and those with straight body types because it emphasizes fabric flow rather than structure. Okay, this is one of my favorite sweaters of all time. This is a cashmere sweater. It's quite oversized, and it's the best example I have, even though it's black and it's going to be so hard to see, of a dolman or batwing sweater. And I'm just simply going to lift my arms, and you'll see that the armscye or the armhole is, look how deep that is. Like, this is the top of my arm. Here is the armhole. This isn't the best example of a dolman because a dolman is much more exaggerated and intentional in terms of the whole batwing look, but it's what I have. I'll be popping up some examples so you can see. Now, this particular design, if you're knitting it yourself, is perfect for lightweight, drapey yarns that really flow over the body. There's no shoulder structure, really structure at all to a dolman sleeve sweater, unless of course it's, one of those vintage ones where you have a really big batwing sleeve and then it cinches in on the body down here, then of course you're going to have some structure. But typically in terms of the upper body and the yoke of the sweater, there's no shaping. It's all very flowy and very relaxed. It's really great if you tend to have a flatter body shape, maybe you have a flatter bust and there's not a lot of stuff going on up here because you get a lot of this really lovely fabric flow that kind of detracts from the fact that there's not a lot of shaping going on. But I feel like it's equally as beautiful on folks with larger busts because you do have a lot of generous space here. You don't feel like any part of your body is fighting to break free. Now, of course, some of the downfalls of this, if you even want to call it that, and I feel like you kind of know this going into it, is because of the batwing sleeve, you have a lot of extra fabric down here. However, if the sweater is designed properly, that isn't going to feel like bulk. It's going to just feel like a natural part of the sweater. Typically, it just is kind of amorphous, right? It just hangs around the body in a really lovely open drapey way, but it can be boxy, especially if you're thinking of Joji Locatelli's boxy, very much a boxy dolman sleeve sweater with a really deep armhole. Now, you could definitely add some side shaping, maybe cinch it in a little bit with some decreases and then bring it back out again, giving it a little bit of an hourglass shape. I kind of did that in my sketch. Because I felt like it needed something even as I was sketching this. You can see that there's, a little bit of shaping in there, right? But it is one of those that tends to be, like I said, a little bit amorphous. And so you want to consider that if things that are boxy don't mesh with your vibe. The saddle shoulder, one that I don't actually own, but I really love. Saddle shoulders feature a narrow strip of fabric that runs from the neck edge out over the shoulder cap, connecting the front and the back pieces. You'll often see them in classic menswear or Gansey style knits. It gives a nice clean tailored look, and it has a really great fit at the shoulder, accentuating the structure of the shoulder. However, if it doesn't have short row shaping or any kind of shaping to accommodate a more broader or rounded back or a more fuller chest, it can feel restrictive over the shoulders. All right, I'm off the hook with this next one because I don't actually have a saddle shoulder sweater in my possession. So we're just going to talk about the saddle shoulder. I feel like the saddle shoulder sweater offers such a clean, tailored look for more broad, athletic shoulders, and those saddle panels on the top of the shoulder give a really nice place to showcase some really lovely stitch patterns or stitch texture, which I included. You saw it. I included it in my little sketch. I put some little pearl bumps up there. I just love this, particularly in a man's sweater. I feel like it accommodates broader shoulders really well and just gives a nice svelte, put together, polished look to the sweater. If, like a set-in sleeve, you don't really like sweaters that have a lot of structure or tailored vibes, this one might not be for you because it really does have a lot of that structure. And because it has a panel that pulls over the outside of the shoulder, it might make it feel a little restrictive if you tend to have maybe a shallow shoulder slope or more broad shoulders. When you're choosing a pattern that is for saddle shoulders, see if there is a schematic in the pattern, and if there is, check the shoulder width and compare it to your own. Bonus if it says something in the pattern somewhere that you can adjust the width of the shoulders, or if it gives you tips and instructions on how to do that. Now, again, also, if you are interested in the saddle shoulder look, but you really don't want to worry too much about seaming and you don't want the structure to be too restrictive, look for those contiguously knit saddle shoulder sweaters. You're going to find this on Ravelry if you narrow your search down to contiguously knit sweaters, or just find the sweater you're interested in, and then those little bubbles at the bottom of the pattern page, if the word contiguous pops up, you know that this is knit relatively seamlessly with picked up stitches, which means it's going to be less restrictive in terms of being tailored. Just because a sweater doesn't fit you doesn't mean there's something off with your gauge or your size. Sometimes the construction just isn't vibing with you because of the way the sweater was designed or the way it's fitting around your proportions. If your chest and neckline are creeping up your neck or the raglan seams seem to be pulling away from one another, it doesn't matter how much more size you add to that, nothing's really going to fix a proportion issue. And if you just knit a bigger size, you just have a bigger sweater that might end up just looking overdone or frumpy or shapeless and all of that. Here are some quick rules of thumb to take away with you. If you have neckline discomfort, you probably have a vertical depth issue. If your raglan is tight at the yoke, you have a shoulder to chest shape mismatch, which means the increases are happening in a way that is not accommodating for either your chest or your shoulders, or in some cases both. If you have a lot of underarm bunching and not in a good way, in a way that feels really extra, you have an oversized or poorly proportioned arm side or armhole. And that requires an armhole modification or figuring out how to make it more deep or more shallow depending on what the issue is. Okay, so after all of that, what does all of this even mean? How do you go about choosing the right type of sweater for your body based on the issues that you probably can either anticipate or already know you've encountered in the past? If you're looking for more structure, go with something like a saddle shoulder or a set-in sleeve. If you want something with a little bit more drape and flounce, maybe a dolman or a circular yoke, or even a drop shoulder for that nice casual oversized fit. If you're looking for something that falls somewhere in the middle, I love a good raglan. Now, one of the things I love about this book, and you don't have to have this book to do this, but it's good to have it on hand, is it gives a place in here where you keep track of your proportions. I feel like moving forward with your search for the right sweater size for you or shape for you is to know your proportions going in so that you can compare your proportions to the schematic of the sweater. Now, we fluctuate, our sizes fluctuate, but if you're kind of staying steady, you can go ahead and take your proportions down around and then check them every so often, but have them in one place so that you don't have to be measuring yourself every time you go pattern hunting. Check your proportions, look at the schematic for the sweater, and see if it feels like that could work for what you're working with. Just because a pattern technically has your bust size doesn't necessarily mean that the shoulder to chest proportions are going to work for you, and that might mean that you need to make some modifications. This is why the Franken Sweater series over on Patreon is great, because we talk a lot about that as a community over there in the chats, in the comments to the videos, and then I address those questions and comments and concerns in each additional video. And so it all kind of comes up in a really organic, natural way, because we all have these fit and proportional size issues at some point. Some of them are more major than others. Some of them we're just like, fine, we don't care. We can get over it because we just like the style of the sweater. But if it is something that you're really concerned with or you're frustrated by, it's really important to just know your proportions going in and to know which of these structures work best with those proportions. Check the videos I linked down below for some additional insight. And always remember, don't be afraid to modify. Seek out resources that teach you how to modify your sweaters, whether it's a book, whether it's a blog post, whether it's tutorial videos, and just grow the pair that you need to modify your sweater, because it's not going to break the pattern. There's ways to do it so that it works for your body, and it really liberates you moving forward, because then you can start making patterns that work for your shape and not against it. Sweater construction really is like architecture of your knitwear, and when you can kind of understand your own personal floor plan, you know how to get the garments to fit your frame. And if it doesn't fit, then like I said, you could modify or remodel. Drop a comment down below. What construction works best for you? Which have you avoided for various different reasons? And if you have some additional resources for how you can modify your garments, let us know down below. The comment section is a very valuable place to go to get additional insight and information. I hope you took value from today's video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Like I said, check out the after show over on Patreon, where I share with you my little paint with me session of these little sweater artworks that I did. And I appreciate you for checking that out. I will see you guys in the next one, which will be coming out this week. I'm doing 2 videos this week since last week I had family in town for the beginning of the summer and a shop update, so it was difficult to get it out. So check for another video before the end of this week. I will see you then. Happy knitting, happy making, happy whatever it is that you're doing. Take care, be well, and I will see you soon. Bye.